The morning I finally learned the truth about the old man, the bench was already empty. Same bench he sat on every single day for the 11 months I knew him. Same corner, same cracked green paint, same spot near the bus sign where the pole leans a little to the left. Empty. I stood there like an idiot with 2 coffees going cold in my hands, waiting for a man I had spent the first 3 months of that year treating like he was invisible. Worse than invisible, like he was an annoyance, like his good morning was a thing I had to survive. And now the bench was empty, and there was a folded piece of paper in my pocket that a woman had handed me the day before, with my description written on the outside in a shaky hand, and I could not make myself open it. My fingers would not do it. You want to know the kind of man I was back then? I will tell you exactly. I was the kind of man who got laid off after 19 years and decided the whole world owed him an apology. The kind who came home and made his wife smaller just so he could feel bigger. The kind who watched his own kids learn to tiptoe around him and told himself they were the problem. The kind who looked at an old man being kind to strangers at a bus stop and thought, what a sad, pathetic way to spend your last years on this earth. That was me, in February, on that bench, sitting 2 feet away from the one person who was about to change everything about how I treat every single human being I meet, and I did not even know his name yet. I know his name now. I will carry it the rest of my life. Let me back up. Let me tell you how a man loses himself, and how a stranger on a green bench hands him back to himself, one cold morning at a time. Because if I do not start at the beginning, the part at the end will not land on you the way it landed on me, and I need it to land. I made a promise that it would. It starts the day they called me into a glass room, and 19 years turned into a cardboard box. I gave that company 19 years. I started at 26, worked my way up from the loading floor to a desk with my own name on a little plastic plate. I missed my son's first steps because of a shipment that had to go out that night. I missed birthdays, anniversaries, 100 dinners. I told myself it was all worth it, because I was building something. Security. A future. The kind of life where nobody could ever pull the floor out from under my family. And one Tuesday in January, a man 20 years younger than me, in a shirt that cost more than my whole outfit, sat me down in a glass room and told me the company was going in a new direction. That was the phrase he used. A new direction. Like I was a car he was turning at an intersection. 19 years, and it took him 4 minutes. I counted. I actually sat there and counted the minutes, because I could not feel anything else, so I counted. 4 minutes to end the thing I had built my whole life around. Then they walked me out. That is the part nobody warns you about. They walk you out like a criminal. Some kid from security I had waved at every morning for years would not even look at me. I carried my box past the desks of people I had trained, and every one of them suddenly had somewhere very important to look that was not me. I sat in my car in that parking lot for an hour, could not turn the key, just sat there holding a stapler and a photo of my kids, and a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Dad," which my daughter gave me as a joke 2 Christmases back, and I thought, this is it. This is what I am worth. A box. I did not tell my wife for 3 days. I got dressed every morning, kissed her goodbye, and drove to a parking lot to sit there until it was time to come home. On the 4th day she found the box in the trunk, and the look on her face when she understood, I will never forget it. Not because she was angry. Because she was scared, and she was trying so hard not to let me see that she was scared. We had a mortgage, 2 kids, a payment on a truck I loved more than a grown man should love a truck. And now we had one income. Hers. The front desk at a dentist's office. And a savings account that would last maybe 5 months if we did not breathe too hard. The truck went first. I sold it to a guy who lowballed me, and I took his lousy number because I had no leverage, and we both knew it. Watching him drive it off the lot felt like watching a piece of myself go with it. Stupid, I know. It is metal and rubber. But it was mine, and I had earned it, and now it was gone like everything else was going. The job search was its own kind of humiliation. I sent out 60 resumes in the first month. 60. I heard back from maybe 8. And the interviews, when I got them, were with kids half my age who slid my resume across the table and asked why there was such a big gap, when the gap was 3 weeks old, and asked where I saw myself in 5 years, when I could not see myself past the next mortgage payment. Overqualified, they said. We went with someone who is a better long-term fit, they said. I learned that all of it is code. All of it means the same thing. You are too old, and you cost too much, and we can get 2 of somebody else for the price of you. So there I was, 45 years old, no job, no truck, and every single morning a city bus to catch, to go stand in lines and fill out applications and get told the same soft no in a dozen different outfits. And I was angry. God, I was angry. Not the loud kind, the quiet kind that seeps into everything you touch. I was angry at the company, at the kid in the expensive shirt, at the economy, at younger men, at the whole rigged game. And because I could not get my hands on any of that, I put the anger where it was easy to put, on the people who loved me, on strangers who had done nothing to me, on a bus that was always 3 minutes late. I stopped recognizing myself in the mirror. That is the truth. The face looking back at me had my father's mouth, turned down hard at the corners, and my father was a bitter man, and I had spent my whole life swearing I would never wear that face. But there it was. Every morning. A little more of him, a little less of me. My wife noticed it before I did. She stopped joking with me in the kitchen. My son stopped leaving his door open. The whole house got quieter, the way a house gets quiet when everyone in it is bracing for something. I told myself they just did not understand what I was going through. I told myself a lot of things that year that were not true. That is the man who showed up at that bus stop on the first cold morning in February. A man carrying 19 years of resentment in a box he did not know how to set down. And there was an old man sitting on a green bench, smiling at the sunrise like he had somewhere wonderful to be. The first thing I noticed about the old man was that he talked to everybody. And I mean everybody. The teenager with the headphones who clearly did not want to be spoken to, the tired woman in scrubs coming off a night shift, the bus driver by name, the pigeons. I swear to God, the pigeons. He would sit on that green bench in a coat that had seen better decades, with a paper cup of coffee from the gas station across the street, and he would say good morning to the whole world like the world had ever done one thing for him. I hated it. I know how that sounds. I am not proud of it. But you have to understand where I was. I was drowning, and here was this man acting like every gray, freezing morning was a gift, and it made me furious in a way I could not even explain. His kindness felt like an insult, like he was showing off a thing I had lost the ability to feel. That first morning he turned to me and said, "Cold one today, isn't it? Warm coffee helps." And he lifted his little paper cup like a toast. I looked at him for about half a second, and I said nothing, not a word. I looked back down at my phone, and I let the silence sit there until it got uncomfortable, and then past uncomfortable, until he finally looked away. And I felt something ugly in my chest that I told myself was satisfaction. Good, I thought. Leave me alone. He did not stop, though. That was the thing. Every single morning, same bench, same time, and every morning he would try. Good morning. Looks like rain. You catch the game last night. Small things. Nothing things. And every morning I gave him nothing back. A grunt, if he was lucky. Usually just my back, and the top of my head bent over a phone I was not even really looking at. There was a young woman at that stop too, maybe 30, always rushing, always stressed. One morning she dropped her whole bag, and the contents went everywhere. Papers, a coffee, her keys skidding under the bench. And before she could even react, the old man was down on his knees on that cold, wet concrete, gathering her things, handing them back one by one, telling her it was all right. Take a breath. You have got time. The bus is always late anyway. She almost cried. I watched her almost cry over a stranger picking up her keys. And you know what I thought? I thought, get up off the ground, old man, you are embarrassing yourself. That is the honest truth of who I was. Someone knelt on the cold concrete to help a crying woman, and my very first thought was contempt. I want you to sit with that for a second, because I sat with it later. I sat with it for a long, long time. There was a morning, it was so cold you could see everybody's breath, and a homeless man came shuffling up to the stop, the kind of man most people look through like glass. I looked through him. I am ashamed to say it, but I did. And the old man did not. He scooted over and made room on the bench and asked the fellow if he wanted to sit a while and get off his feet. Talked to him like he was anybody. Like he was somebody. When the bus came, the old man pressed his own bus fare into the man's hand and waited for the next one. Gave up his ride. In the cold. For a stranger who would never be able to pay him back. And I got on my warm bus and watched him through the window, still on that bench, still talking, and I thought, what a fool. What a soft, sad old fool. I started building a whole story about him in my head, the way you do when you have decided to dislike someone. I decided he was one of those lonely old men with nothing left, no family, no purpose. Just riding buses and bothering strangers to fill the empty hours until the end. I decided his kindness was weakness. Desperation, even. A man begging the world to notice him because nobody at home did. I was so sure I had him figured out. so completely sure. I would find out later just how wrong a person can be about another person, just how far off. But not yet. In February, I was still the man on the bench who thought he had everybody figured out, and who was very quietly, very completely, coming apart at the seams. The bus would come. I would get on without a word. And behind me I could hear him, every single time, telling the driver to have a good one. And meaning it. Actually meaning it. I could not stand it. And here is the part I did not understand yet. I could not stop hearing it, either. It got under my skin and it stayed there. Some part of me, some part I had buried under 19 years of resentment and 3 months of free fall, some small part of me heard that old man say have a good one to a stranger and ached. Ached like a muscle you forgot you had until you use it wrong. I did not know what that ache was yet. I thought it was irritation. It was hunger. I was starving for exactly what he had, and I hated him for having it. Here is the part I am most ashamed of, so I am just going to say it plain. While I was busy despising a kind old man at a bus stop, I was being cruel to the only people on this earth who still loved me. My wife Diane is the most patient person I have ever known. For 3 months she absorbed a version of me I did not even recognize. I snapped at her over nothing. The dishwasher loaded wrong. A light left on. A dinner she worked all day and then came home and cooked, that I picked at and pushed away, because my pride was too big to eat food bought with her paycheck. She would ask how the job search was going, and I would take it like an accusation, like she was reminding me I had failed. One night she just asked me, gentle as anything, if I wanted to talk about it. And I told her, I remember the exact words. I said, "What is there to talk about? You want a play-by-play of me getting rejected all day." And she went quiet. And she got up and cleared the plates. And I saw her wipe her eyes at the sink with her back to me, so I would not see. And I said nothing. I let my wife cry at the sink, and I said nothing. My kids started to disappear around me. That is how I think of it now. They did not leave. They disappeared. My son, 14, stopped asking me to throw the ball. My daughter, 10, the one who gave me the joke mug, stopped coming to sit with me on the couch. They learned. Kids learn fast. They learned that dad was a storm now, and you do not stand out in a storm if you can help it. You wait for it to pass. Except this storm was not passing. One evening I overheard my daughter ask her mother, "Is Daddy going to be sad forever?" And Diane said, "No, baby, he is just going through something hard. He still loves us very much." She defended me. Even then, she defended me to our own child. And instead of that breaking me open, instead of that fixing me, I got angry that they were talking about me at all. That is how far gone I was. My little girl was scared her father would be sad forever, and I made it about my own wounded pride. The worst night, the one I still cannot fully forgive myself for, my son came into the kitchen to show me something he had built for a school project. A little bridge out of popsicle sticks. He was proud of it. He was 14 and trying so hard to reach me, and I was staring at a rejection email on my phone, and I said, "Not now, Ethan." Just those 2 words, "Not now." And I did not even look up. And he set the bridge down on the counter and went back to his room, and it sat there for 3 days, and I threw it away when I was cleaning up, and I have thought about that little bridge more times than I can count. I was becoming my father. I need to tell you that, because it matters later. My father was a hard man who lost his job when I was a boy, and he never got over it, and he made all of us pay for it every single day until he died bitter and alone in a chair by a window. I spent my whole life swearing I would never be him. And there I was, becoming him, brick by brick, and I could not stop, because stopping meant admitting how scared and small I felt, and I would rather have burned the whole house down than admit that out loud. There was one night. Diane had gone to bed early. I sat alone at the kitchen table with the bills spread out in front of me. Red numbers, past due stamps, the math that never worked no matter how many times I ran it. And I put my head in my hands, and for the first time since the layoff, I let myself feel how far I had fallen. Not just the money. Me, the kind of husband I had become. The kind of father. The kind of man who could not even be civil to an old man saying good morning. And a thought came to me that scared me worse than any red number on that table. The thought was, they would be better off without you. I did not do anything with that thought. I want to be very clear about that. But it visited me that night. It pulled out a chair, and it sat down across from me, and it stayed a good long while. That is how low the water got. That is how deep under I was. The next morning I got up, put on the same tired jacket, and walked to the bus stop in the dark. And the old man was already there, on his bench. And he looked at me, and something in my face must have shown, because for once he did not say good morning. He just said, "Rough night." And for the first time in 3 months, I did not have it in me to give him nothing back. I just nodded. A small nod. Barely anything. But it was the first true thing that had passed between us, and he caught it. I saw him catch it. He did not smile, did not press, did not make a thing of it. He just nodded back, slow, like a man acknowledging something he had been waiting a long time to see. And then he looked back out at the street, and he let me have my silence. And somehow that was the kindest thing anyone had done for me in a very long time. It rained hard the next week, not a drizzle. A real downpour, the kind that comes in sideways and finds every gap in your clothes. I had forgotten my umbrella. Of course I had. I was forgetting everything those days. Keys, appointments, the names of the people interviewing me. I stood at that bus stop with rain running down the back of my neck, soaked to the skin, shivering, and honestly close to just laughing at how pathetic the whole picture was. A grown man, drowning at a bus stop, 12 minutes from the warm house he could barely afford. And then the rain stopped hitting me. Not everywhere, just above me. I looked up, and there was an umbrella, a big old black one with a bent rib, and holding it over both of us was the old man. He had scooted down the bench and stretched his arm all the way out so the umbrella covered me instead of him. His own shoulder was getting soaked. He was not even looking at me. He was looking out at the rain, calm as still water, like this was the most natural thing in the whole world. I should have thanked him. Any decent person would have thanked him. Instead, I heard myself say, "You are getting wet." And he said, "I have been wet before." He said it with a little smile. "I will dry." So we stood there under that umbrella, two strangers, one of whom had spent months treating the other like garbage. And the rain came down, and neither of us said anything for a long time. And something in me, some wall I had been holding up with both hands for 3 months, cracked. Just a hairline, but it cracked. Because here is what I could not get around. I had given this man nothing, less than nothing, cold shoulders, dead silence, contempt I thought I was hiding, and probably was not. And he held an umbrella over my head and let himself get soaked to the bone and asked for absolutely nothing back. Not a thank you, not a conversation, nothing at all. Nobody had done anything for me in months, without a form to fill out or a hoop to jump through. And this old man in a coat from another era just quietly kept me dry, because I was a person, and I was standing in the rain. There is a thing that happens to you when you have been treated as a problem for long enough. You start to believe it. You start to move through the world braced for the next person to look at you the way the security kid looked at me, the way the interviewers looked at me, like a thing to be gotten past. And when somebody treats you soft after all that, when somebody just quietly decides you are worth an umbrella, it does something to you that is hard to put into words. It is like a door you thought was painted shut swinging open on its own. When the bus came, he shook the umbrella out, and we got on, and I sat down 2 rows behind him like always. But that morning I did not stare at my phone. I watched him. I watched him say good morning to the driver by name. I watched him give up his seat to a pregnant woman without being asked, and then stand the whole way holding the rail with hands that shook a little, and I realized those hands were old. Really old. And he was standing so a stranger could sit. And I thought about all the mornings I had stayed planted in my seat. All the mornings I had looked away. That was the day I stopped hating him. I want to be honest with you. It was not that I suddenly liked him. I was not there yet. But I stopped hating him. The contempt just ran out of me, like the rain running off that umbrella, and underneath it there was nothing but shame. And under the shame, way down, there was something I had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity. About another human being. About who this man actually was. I could not sleep well that night. I kept thinking about that arm stretched out in the rain. About a stranger choosing to get soaked so I would not have to. About how I would have done the exact opposite. How 3 months ago, 3 weeks ago, I would have pulled my own umbrella in tight and let him stand there dripping and told myself it was his own fault for forgetting one. The next morning, for the first time, I sat down on the bench right next to him. Not 2 seats away, right next to him. Close enough that our shoulders were almost touching. And I said, "Good morning." He turned and looked at me like I had handed him something valuable, something he had been hoping for without ever asking. And he said, "Well, good morning to you too, friend. Cold one, isn't it?" And this time I answered him. I said, "Yeah, it sure is." And then I said the hardest 2 words I had said to anyone in months. I said, "Thank you for yesterday." And he just nodded like it was nothing, like it was the most obvious thing in the world to keep a stranger dry. And maybe to him it was. That was the whole thing about Walter. I did not know his name yet. But that was the whole thing about him, and I was just starting to see it. His name was Walter. It took me 3 days of good mornings before I even asked it, which tells you how out of practice I had gotten at being a person. Walter. He had worked 42 years as a machinist, made parts for airplanes, the kind of precise, patient work where a mistake the size of a hair could bring something down out of the sky. He talked about it with his hands, shaping invisible metal in the air between us, and I could see him young in it. Careful. Proud. We started talking every morning, little by little. The weather first, always the weather, that safe old door people use to get to the real rooms, then the neighborhood, then, slowly, the bigger things. I told him I had lost my job. I do not even know why. I had not said it out loud to anyone, not really, not the truth of it. But one morning it just came out of me on that bench. 19 years, I said. And they walked me out in 4 minutes. And Walter did not do what everybody else did. He did not tell me it happened for a reason. He did not tell me the right door would open. He did not hand me a bumper sticker. He just said, that is a real loss, and you are allowed to grieve it. I almost lost it right there on the bench, because nobody had said that. Nobody. Everybody wanted me to bounce back, to stay positive, to network, to reinvent myself. Walter was the first person who looked at what I had lost and called it a loss. Who gave me permission to be sad about it instead of ashamed of it? I started looking forward to those mornings. That is the strange part. He had a way of asking a question and then actually waiting for the answer. Have you ever noticed how rare that is? Most people ask how you are doing and they are already half turned away. The question is just a noise they make. Walter would ask, and then he would stop, and he would look at you, and he would wait. And you would find yourself telling him the real answer instead of the polite one, because the space was just sitting there open, and it felt rude somehow to fill it with a lie. The bus stop. The thing that symbolized everything I had lost, the truck, the status, the whole life. It became the best part of my day. Because Walter was there. He asked about my kids. He remembered their names after I said them once, Ethan and Grace, and every morning after that he would ask, how are Ethan and Grace? He asked about Diane. He remembered she worked at a dentist's office, and he would ask if her feet were holding up, because he said front desk work is hard on the feet and nobody ever thinks about it. He noticed people. He noticed the parts of them nobody else bothered to notice. One morning I finally asked him why he was like this. I said it kind of clumsy. I said, Walter, you talk to everybody, you help everybody, you do not even know these people. Does it not wear you out? And he got quiet for a second, and he looked out at the street, and he said something I have turned over in my head 1,000 times since. He said, everybody you meet is carrying something heavy. You cannot see it, but it is there. The least I can do is not add to the weight, and if I can take a little off, even for a second, well, that is the best use of a morning I can think of. I did not say anything, I just sat with it. Then he said, you were carrying something heavy when you first showed up here. I could see it plain as day. That is why I kept saying good morning. Not because I did not notice you ignoring me. I noticed. I said it because you looked like a man who needed somebody to keep saying it until he could say it back. I had to look away from him then. I had to look at the street and blink hard and pretend it was the wind. Because for 3 months I had thought I was invisible to that old man. I thought he had not noticed me at all. And it turned out he had seen me perfectly. He had seen all of it. The anger, the drowning, the whole falling apart of me. And he had kept showing up anyway, every morning. He had chosen to keep showing up for a man who gave him nothing. That is the morning I understood I had had him completely backwards. The kindness was not weakness. It was the strongest thing I had ever stood next to. It was a choice he made brand new every single day, and it cost him something to make it, and he made it anyway. I went home that afternoon and I looked at my wife setting the table, tired from her shift, still finding it in her to smile at me, and I thought, she has been doing for me exactly what Walter has been doing. Saying good morning to a man who kept giving her nothing back. Waiting. And I had not even seen it. What I did not know yet was how much it had cost Walter to learn the thing he was teaching me, what he had lost to get that wise. If I had known, I think I would have held on to those mornings even tighter than I did. And I held on pretty tight. Walter never talked about himself. I noticed that after a while, he asked about everybody, remembered everything about everybody. But if you tried to turn a question back on him, he would smile and steer it somewhere else. Gentle, but firm. a closed door with a kind sign hung on it. So I got curious, and one gray Thursday, I finally pushed a little. I asked him if he had family, kids, anybody. He was quiet for a long moment, longer than usual, and then he said, "I had a son." Had. That one word landed in my chest like a stone down a well. He did not say more right away. He just held his paper cup with both hands, and I watched the steam come off it, and I decided not to push. If he wanted to tell me, he would. And after a while, he did. His son's name was Daniel. He would have been about my age, Walter said. Just like that. Would have been. Daniel died at 47 years back. A heart thing that nobody caught in time. He was there in the morning and gone by the night, Walter said. And there is no preparing for a morning like that, no matter how many mornings a man has lived. I did not know what to say. There is nothing to say. The people who scramble to say something are usually just trying to fix their own discomfort. So I did what Walter always did. I stayed right there in it with him. I let the quiet be quiet. Then he told me the rest, slow, in pieces, over that morning and the ones that came after. After Daniel died, Walter's wife, Ruth, could not carry it. He said grief takes people different ways, and it took Ruth into a quiet room she never really came back out of. She passed 2 years after their son. Walter said the doctors called it her heart. But then he said, in the plainest voice you ever heard, it was grief. She died of missing him. I have never heard anyone say a truer thing in my life. So this man who knelt on cold concrete for a stranger's keys, who held an umbrella over a person who had shown him nothing but contempt, who said good morning to a bitter, broken stranger every single day for 3 months until that stranger could finally say it back. This man had buried his only child, then buried his wife, and was living alone in a 1-bedroom apartment, riding a city bus every morning to nowhere in particular. That is the thing that stopped me cold. He was not riding the bus to get anywhere. I asked him once where he was headed, and he smiled and said, "Oh, here and there." It took me weeks to understand what that meant. Walter did not have anywhere to go. He rode the bus, he sat at that stop, because that is where the people were. He had lost every single person who belonged to him. And instead of turning bitter, instead of turning into my father in a chair by a window, instead of turning into me, he had decided to make strangers his family. To pour out into the world all the love he no longer had anyone left to give it to. He looked at a bus stop full of tired, closed-off, hurrying people. People like me. And he decided we were worth his kindness anyway, not because we had earned it. Because he had it to give, and giving it was the only thing that still made sense after everything was gone. I thought about my own house, my wife who still loved me, my 2 kids who were still there, still mine, still waiting for me to come back to them. I had everything Walter had lost. Everything. And I had been treating all of it like a punishment. I asked him that Thursday how he did it, how he got up every morning after all that and still had it in him to be kind. And he thought a while, and he said it almost turned him to stone. For a whole year after Ruth, he did not speak to a soul if he could help it. Sat in his apartment with the curtains shut. And then one morning he got on a bus, he did not even know why, and a little girl smiled at him, just a stranger's kid, and he waved back, and something in him that had been frozen cracked just enough to let a little light in. He decided right then he was not going to spend whatever mornings he had left being a locked room. The love did not die with the people, he said. It just needed somewhere new to go. That was the lesson. It did not come as a speech. Walter never once told me how to live my life. He just showed me his, and let me hold it up next to mine, and the comparison did the rest of the work. I went home that night and I sat down on the couch next to my daughter. She flinched at first. That little flinch is a thing I will carry the rest of my days, but I stayed, and I put my arm around her, and after a while she leaned in. And I held my little girl and thought about a man on a green bench who would have given anything in this whole world, for one more ordinary night on a couch with the child he lost. I did not tell her any of that. I just held on, and I did not let go until she got sleepy, and I carried her up to bed the way I used to when she was small. Something shifted in me after that, not all at once. Change does not work the way it works in the movies. There is no single morning where the music swells and you are fixed. It is slower and quieter than that. It happens in small choices you make over and over until they become who you are. But it started at that bus stop, with Walter, and it followed me home. I apologized to Diane, really apologized, not the mumbled kind. One night after the kids were down, I sat her at the kitchen table, the same table where I had hit rock bottom weeks before, and I told her I was sorry. For the snapping. For the silence. For making her cry at the sink and saying nothing. For letting our kids learn to tiptoe around me. I told her I had been drowning, and I had been pulling her under with me, and that was not fair, and it was not who I wanted to be. She cried. I cried, which I had not done in front of her in years. And then she said something that leveled me. She said, "I never stopped seeing the real you in there. I was just waiting for you to come back." She had been waiting. All that time, waiting for me the same way Walter waited for me to say good morning. Showing up every day, holding the door open, trusting I would walk back through it. I started being a father again. I threw the ball with Ethan. Badly. My arm is not what it was, and he laughed at me, and it was the best sound I had heard in a year. I let Grace teach me some game on her tablet, and pretended to be worse at it than I was so she could win, and she saw right through me, and that was even better than the game. I could not undo throwing away that little popsicle stick bridge, but I sat down with Ethan and asked him to show me what he was building now, and I actually watched this time. I actually saw my son, and I started treating strangers the way Walter did. It felt fake at first, I will not lie. Forced. Saying good morning to the mail carrier, letting somebody merge, looking the checkout clerk in the eye and asking how her day was going, and then waiting for the real answer. But Walter told me once, kindness is a muscle. It is weak if you never use it, and it gets strong if you do. So I used it, and it got easier. And then, somewhere along the way, it stopped being an act and got real. I found work too, not the job I lost. Something smaller, a supply warehouse. Less money, no name on any desk, boots instead of loafers. The old me would have been humiliated by it. But I would sit with Walter in the mornings before my shift and tell him about it, and he would say, honest work, done well, is never beneath a man, and I believed him. Because he had spent 42 years being proud of making small metal parts that nobody would ever see, parts that kept whole planes up in the sky. Nobody claps for the machinist. He did it right anyway, for 42 years. I wanted to give something back to him. It was eating at me. This man had handed me my whole life back, and all I had ever given him was good mornings. So I started bringing 2 coffees. Real ones. From a shop, not the gas station. He protested the first time, said I did not need to do that, and I said, Walter, everybody you meet is carrying something heavy. The least I can do is not add to the weight. I said his own words right back to him, and he laughed, a real laugh, from the belly, and his eyes went wet, and he said, well, would you look at that? One morning I brought him a slice of pie too, because he had mentioned once that Ruth used to make him cherry pie on Sundays. I set it down next to his coffee and said, they had cherry, and that big kind face of his went still for a second, and then he said, thank you, son. He had never called me son before. He did not say it again after that. But he said it that morning, and I have held on to that word like something you keep in your pocket. That was a good morning. One of the very best. But I had started to notice things too. Small things I did not want to notice. Walter tired faster now. He would pause on the steps of the bus, just for a second, gathering himself. His hands, always a little shaky, shook more. One morning he had a coughing fit that scared me, deep and rattling, and when it finally passed, he waved me off and said he was fine. Just an old engine. They do not idle as smooth as they used to. I told myself he was fine. I wanted him to be fine. I needed him to be fine. Because I had just gotten my life back, and a big part of how I got it back was this old man on a green bench, and some selfish part of me could not picture the mornings without him in them. I should have said more. I should have asked more. I should have made him see a doctor, or gotten his phone number like a normal person does with a friend. That is another thing I will carry. Because a few weeks later, on an ordinary Tuesday, I walked up to that stop with 2 coffees going cold in my hands. And the bench was empty. I want to tell you I stayed calm. I did not. I stood there holding 2 coffees, and I told myself 100 stories. He slept in. He caught an earlier bus. He has got an appointment somewhere. Old men have doctors. It is nothing. He will be here tomorrow, on the bench, saying cold one isn't it, and I will feel foolish for the knot in my stomach. He was not there the next day either, or the day after that. The strangest part was how much it threw me. A year before, I would not have cared if that old man vanished off the face of the earth. I would have been glad for the quiet. And now his empty bench felt like a hole punched clean through my morning. I kept looking down the street for that coat. I kept turning at every shuffle of footsteps behind me. The other regulars felt it too. The nurse, the rushing young woman. Even the bus driver slowed at the stop and looked, the way you look for someone you have gotten used to seeing, and then drove on with a face I had never seen him make. I did not have his phone number. Think about that. 11 months of mornings, the man who gave me my life back, and I did not have a phone number, or an address, or even a last name. I knew his son was Daniel, and his wife was Ruth, and he made airplane parts for 42 years, and he took his coffee black, and he had been carrying more grief than any one person should ever have to carry, and I loved him. I did. I had figured that out by then, and I had no way on earth to find him. The woman in the scrubs, the night shift nurse, she rode that route too, and she had become part of our little bus stop family by then. Because Walter had that effect, he built families out of strangers without anyone even noticing he was doing it. I asked her if she had seen him, and her face changed, and she said she had been meaning to tell somebody, but she had not known who. She worked at the county hospital, and a man matching Walter's description had come in a few days back. She could not tell me more than that. Privacy, rules, she could lose her job, but she looked at me, and she saw whatever was written on my face, and she said, "Go to the hospital. Ask at the front desk. You said his name is Walter. Just go. Go now." I went that afternoon. I sat in that waiting room for 2 hours with my heart up in my throat. And finally a woman came out, younger than me, with Walter's eyes, exactly his eyes. I knew before she said a single word. She was his niece, his late brother's daughter, the only family he had left in this world, and she lived 3 states away, and she had flown in when the hospital finally tracked her down. She sat down next to me, and she told me everything. Walter had been sick a long time, longer than I had known him, his heart. The same thing that took his son, only slow, giving out a little more each year. The doctors had told him a full year ago to stop, to rest, to stay home and take it easy and not exert himself. And Walter had listened to every word of it, and then he had kept getting on that bus every single morning anyway. She said, "I never understood why. He was sick. He was exhausted. He should have been home resting. And instead, every morning before dawn, he would get himself up and dressed and go sit at a bus stop." I asked him about it once. Do you know what he told me? I said no. I could barely speak, but I got that out. I said no. What did he tell you? She said, "He told me, that is where I do my living now. There are people there who need a good morning, and I am one of the last ones still willing to give it. I will rest when I am done." And then she reached into her bag, and she took out a folded piece of paper, and she said, "He wrote this a while back. He kept it folded up in his coat pocket. It has got a description of you on the outside. The man from the bus stop who started bringing 2 coffees. He told me about you. He said if anything ever happened to him, somebody should make sure you got this." She put it in my hand, and I could not open it. My fingers just would not do it. I stood up and I thanked her, and I asked the only question I had the courage to ask. I asked if he had been alone, at the end. And she looked at me, and she said no. I was holding his hand, and the last thing he did was ask a nurse her name and tell her it was a good one. Of course he did. Of course that was the last thing he did. I walked out of that hospital with my legs barely working under me, and the next morning, out of habit, out of something I cannot name, I walked to the bus stop, and I stood in front of that empty green bench, with Walter's folded note in my pocket, and my hands shaking, and I could not make myself read it. Which is exactly where this whole story started. You remember. Me, at the empty bench, with the note I could not bring myself to open. So let me finally open it for you now. I sat down on the green bench, his bench. First time I had ever sat on it without him beside me. And I opened the note. His handwriting was shaky and careful, the hand of a man who once measured metal to the width of a hair. It was not long. Walter was never long-winded. It said this. "Friend, if you are reading this, then I have caught my last bus. Do not be sad for me. I got more mornings than most men do, and the last stretch of them, the ones with you, were some of my favorites. You think I gave you something. I need you to know you handed it right back. An old man had run clean out of people to love. And then a fellow showed up on this bench carrying the whole world on his shoulders, and let me help carry a little of it, and gave me somebody to look forward to again. You did that. So the way I figure it, we are square. Now do me one favor. Keep the bench warm. Somebody is going to sit down next to you one of these cold mornings looking the exact way you looked that first February day. Lost. Angry. Like the world owes them an apology. When they do, you say good morning. And you keep saying it until they can say it back. That is the whole thing. That is everything I know worth knowing. Pass it on. Walter. I sat there and I cried like I have not cried in my entire life, on a bus stop bench. A grown man, coffee going cold beside me, crying over an old machinist that most of the world had walked right past for years. People kept moving by on the sidewalk. Nobody stopped. Except one person did. A young guy, maybe 20, earbuds in, hood up. And he pulled one earbud out, and he said, "Hey man, you okay?" And I looked up at this kid, this stranger, and I understood, right down to the bottom of me, exactly what Walter had spent 11 months trying to teach me. I wiped my face with the back of my hand, and I said, yeah, I am okay. Cold one today, isn't it? And I patted the empty spot on the bench next to me. And he looked at me for a second, and then he sat down. Now, if you have made it all the way here with me, I am going to ask you for one small thing, and it will not cost you a penny. Subscribe to this channel. Not for me. For Walter. Because the only reason I sit here and tell these stories now is a promise I made to a man on a green bench to pass it on. And every single person who hears this and treats one stranger a little softer tomorrow, that is Walter. Still going. Still saying good morning to the world.